much. Well, we've got some time for some questions. I'm sure our members have some questions. Who would like, Mr. Stone?
Just one I heard a couple times, Ms. McIntyre and I believe Mr. Crosby committed to the 98% of the state. But as was brought up earlier, I think there's a distinction there. Is that 98% in each region, or is that 98% overall?
In terms of our support for the deployment of broadband, we support broadband for deployment of 98% of the state of California, the citizens of the state of California.
Okay, so not on a region-by-region basis?
No.
Okay.
I've not looked at it, quite frankly, on a region-by-region basis. It's always been on a statewide basis.
Right, but that's where we're disadvantaging the rural areas, is by not recognizing that distinction. So, thank you. Oh,
I would agree with Ms. McIntyre, too,
okay.
Statewide.
Mr. Chow?
I was wondering if Mr. Crosby would like to elaborate on satellite broadband in terms of how it works differently from, let's say, the traditional broadband, whether it's cost effective, and under what circumstances would we employ satellite broadband as opposed to the traditional broadband?
Sure. So satellite, like I said, we have a partnership with Dish. They provide both video and satellite broadband where customers want the broadband piece. It is generally deployed in rural areas and mountain areas where we can get a direct signal from the satellite to the terrestrial satellite. And the speeds are 15 meg, so the good solid speeds. The pricing point is a little higher, and I'm blanking on what that pricing point is right now, but it's in the $30, $40 range. But it's a solid service. Our customers like it, and it works well. So it's just another alternative for areas where you can't lay fiber, where you can't put copper, where you just are in a very remote area, and customers like the availability of having broadband, even though it's a little higher priced in their area.
Thank you, Mitch. Maybe a follow-up question for Ms. McIntyre. This question may have been answered by the previous panel since I came in a bit late, so let me throw it out there. I've heard that certain school districts may have issues regarding the taking of Common Core, for example, for students due to either lack of or the inadequacy of the broadband, or lack of, maybe in most circumstances. Have you heard of that situation? And if so, how severe is that problem?
It did come up just briefly earlier, but I can speak to the fact that, yes, we are also aware that there is a problem through our work with the Department of Education and the K-12 high-speed network. I know that they have an effort underway to try and improve the connectivity to some of the school districts to address that problem. In fact, I'm sure they'll speak to it, but I think they're in round 2 of their effort to issue grants to encourage additional broadband deployment to schools, keeping in mind that Common Core is a requirement.
Mr. Chow, I could elaborate just a little bit further on that. It's my understanding the legislature did authorize and appropriate funding to school districts, particularly remote and difficult districts to reach. My understanding that there were 300 schools available for the new services. Competitors bid on those services and were required to provide to those schools between 1 and 10 gigs. My understanding is something around 240 contracts were let. And apparently there were about, give or take, 60 schools where no one bid, either because their size was so small or they were so remote. But the program has moved forward. I don't have a lot of additional detail on it, but I know many companies at this table bid on those projects and succeeded in winning contracts. And the great news is it starts at 1 gig, and some of the schools go as high as 10 gig, depending upon size.
Thank you much.
Mr. Bloom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the statistic of reaching 98% of Californians, by my estimate, and it's really just an estimate that I came up with in my head. That leaves around 350,000 Californians, give or take, who do not have access, and that's a lot of people out there who are not receiving that service. But on looking at this through a different metric, having access to broadband is only half the battle. If you don't have access to the equipment that allows you to fully utilize broadband in the form of smartphones, in the form of other digital devices, then having access to the broadband doesn't really get you where you need to be. I would not guess, I'm quite certain that it is our poorer communities throughout the state who do not have access to that equipment. So I'm wondering if any of you have metrics related to or numbers related to that metric, and what your various companies are doing to address that issue.
Yeah.
Of course.
Just a small example. I really think it starts with leadership in the local community. Actually, our local superintendent in Ducor insisted every family, extremely poverty-stricken area, every family have internet at home. He talked it up. He insisted on it. We piggybacked a marketing campaign, restructured our rates, and this year, it's not big numbers, but we went from 47 to 104 DSL lines in less than 6 months, primarily through this superintendent wanting to help his students. It's local leadership, sir.
Ms. McIntyre.
Assemblymember, as I mentioned just very briefly earlier, there are cable companies that do offer programs. The Internet Essentials program and another program called Connect to Compete are two examples of where the companies will provide a broadband service for $9.95 per month to any household that has a student K through 12, a high school that meets the federal free lunch, the criteria for the federal free lunch program. Along with participation in that program comes $150 towards a device that can also be used by that student. Clearly it's not a program that is available in mass to the general public, but it is certainly available to those communities that have shown a greater need. While I don't have specific criteria or numbers, as you were asking for today, on how successful those programs have been, I would certainly commit to getting back to you with that information. I would also suggest, though, as a part of this conversation, as we talk about schools in Common Core, as Mr. Devine pointed out, there was money made available in the state budget to facilitate connectivity to schools. I would suggest that one of the considerations should also be ensuring that there is network connectivity throughout the campus, and also looking to provide devices for those students. Maybe they'll be used just in the classroom in the beginning, but ultimately to be taken home with them as well.
If I could add some comments from AT&T, we also have an affordable internet choice program that will be rolling out at the end of the first quarter of next year. Similar pricing to what the cable industry currently does. That was part of the AT&T DirecTV merger conditions, and we have agreed to that, and we're happy to do it. That will be a 4-year program. There is one other distinction that I want to make here. We agree with you. Devices are a significant part of adoption of broadband services, whether they be hardware in the home or mobile devices, tablets, and smartphones in your pocket. And I'm sure Mr. Carlson would like to elaborate on that. But one of the distinctions here that I think is relevant is the companies here, the companies that are building the infrastructure, do not manufacture the hardware. And so this is a good conversation to have. It's an important conversation to have. But the group that also needs to be part of this are the manufacturers of the products.
One thing, Mr. Bloom, as we have looked with various public agencies, we've determined that among that segment of the population that accesses broadband only through wireless, it's a significant higher percentage of the population among lower income folks. CDC has done a study of that. Most of the industry folks provide not just on the subsidized programs, but also marketing programs of prepaid wireless, pay-as-you-go wireless, provisions where even if somebody is lower income, you don't have to have a security, credit check. There are other ways to access the products and the internet. And now they're not just the old burner phones. They're actually phones that can access the internet. They're smartphones that can be bought through these programs. So there's a multitude of things that tries to get to some of that area, and I think successfully does to a great extent.
Mr. Bloom, 6.5 years ago, Frontier instituted a program. It was a marketing program where if you signed up for our broadband product, you got a free computer. And we rolled it out nationally, and it was successful. It was rolled out clearly in the properties we have here in California. And we've done it a few times since, nothing recently, but we found that people were able to sign up for service for 2 years, and they got a free computer to access the internet.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions, and we're good. I'm sorry.
Yeah. If I might just follow up very briefly. I appreciate the responses, each of which was somewhat different from the other. I would just say I think it's important that we set goals, as we have with the 98% level here, but set goals on this other metric as well. And then it's important for us to measure our achievement as a state in terms of whether we are reaching those goals. And I fully appreciate the fact that the companies represented here today only represent a part of the industries that need to be involved in partnering to achieve those goals, and the state probably ought to be playing a role as well. It does seem to me that at least this morning I'm not hearing that we have those metrics in place, that we've set a goal, that we understand exactly where we are with our ability to, or with what I think is essential, that every family or child have not just access to the broadband capacity, but the actual equipment to take advantage of that equipment. So I think that there's some work that lies ahead of us. Thank you all.
Thank you. I've got a couple quick questions, and then we'll need to move on. So first of all, thank you very much for the perspective and the information. I really, really appreciate that. Couple quick questions. Ms. McIntyre, you mentioned adoption figures. And so I'd like to kind of go back to that a little bit. From the perspective of the industry, adoption is a limitation on adoption around cost for the consumer? Have you done any work around, and then maybe Mr. Devine might want to chime in on this as well. I mean, what is it that the concept of we build it, they will come, yet you build it and they don't. So what's missing? Why are we getting the lower adoption numbers?
Right. I think there's a number of factors, and certainly cost may be an element, which is why we have the programs that I spoke of earlier. But oftentimes it's because individuals have not yet embraced the technology and determined its importance to their life. And, they need to be educated. I mentioned that at least one of our companies has some digital literacy centers. Those digital literacy centers serve to educate people on not only how to use a device, how to use a computer, but on the importance of using that device to their life. They can use it to apply for a job. They can use it to, communicate when they don't otherwise have a resource to do so. And then in many cases, they just have not figured out how important it is to their life. It's an education effort.
I would agree with that, but I would also add, I think there's a distinction to be made between a fixed wireline broadband product that is in the home versus the mobile broadband product offered by the wireless industry. We are seeing exponential growth on the adoption and utilization of wireless networks. When you think about circumstances as recently as a couple of weeks ago when Apple announced a brand new iPhone, and 13.5 million people that first weekend ordered new ones, even though they had ones in their pockets that actually continued to work. It sort of, I think, demonstrates the dynamic and the aggressive nature of consumer adoption of wireless technologies. They want the newest, they want the fastest, and it's widespread. It is widespread, and it's across all age categories, across every hamlet in the state. So it's a little bit different, but broadband and wireless seem to be moving very aggressively, and consumers are adopting it very quickly.
My final question was kind of related here, and maybe this will be a question, something that we can talk about in a future hearing is these lower cost programs and things that are available. Those are borne on the carrier, more or less. So are there any of our, and this we'll get, I'm sure that we'll get to this at our next meeting, but I'm wondering, are there any of the funds that are available out there that can subsidize the cost for some of these higher cost areas? So.
That is the subject of universal access or universal service for broadband that's currently pending at the FCC. They are, in fact, looking to possibly revise the existing universal service program or to create an addition to that to include broadband service. But there's currently nothing available at the state level other than what is offered and funded by private companies.
Great.
I think she's alluding to the FCC including broadband support as part of the historical USF voice support. We are a broadband world. I think that's the reality of it. So that is occurring. And if I can comment quickly on the adoption, our survey also disclosed there's about 10 to 15% who are not interested, don't want it for varying reasons. It's wonderful for all of us to push to 100%, but we need to recognize that some people are not interested, can't afford it really, or just don't want it.
Thank you. Do you have a comment?
The only thing is I would say is that the FCC is exploring a broadband lifeline program. I know we support that. However, we do need to design these new programs to reflect the new economic reality and not model after the 1950s and 1960s models we had adopted for telephone monopolies.
Thank you. Once again, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it, and look forward to hearing from you in the future. So we're going to move on to our next and final panel, and then we will have opportunity for public comment. So we'll welcome up our next group. Hi. Thank you. Good, how are you? Thank you. Okay. PowerPoint, I presume. Great, thank you. Please, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me to present a little bit about CENIC. CENIC is otherwise known as the Corporation for Education Network Initiatives in California, more easily said as CENIC. Our mission is really very simple. It's to remove a bandwidth as an impediment to education, to research, and clinical care. And we do this in a number of different ways. We focus on access and equity across the state. We also work at the leading edge of these technologies, and we try and be as inclusive as we possibly can. Our constituency is basically education in California. We were chartered by and governed by all of education in the state. The California community colleges, the California State University system, the University of California, the K-12 system, three private universities, USC, Caltech, and Stanford. And most recently, we have reached out and are now including California's 1,100 or so public libraries. We have a backbone that's roughly 3,800 miles of fiber, and we work across all the counties in California with our telecom partners and others to lease circuits to connect last-mile sites. We have roughly 10,000 sites connected. And once we have all of the libraries connected, we are guessing that we'll have around 20 million Californians using the network. And our governance, as I mentioned, is by our charter associates. I'd like to note, too, that I looked in our annual report last year, and we collaborate with over 500 private sector partners in hardware, software, networks, fiber, telcos, cable companies, and so on. And I know that the AT&T National Network has 56 petabytes of data on it. I'd like to note that on our small California network, we see about 30 petabytes of data across the network every month, and that doubles about every 6 months, given the increasing use of big data, particularly in science. We have 3 network layers, and it is sort of if you will, a California-wide intranet. We have the Digital California network, and that's largely what our K-12 community uses, our community colleges and our public libraries. There's a high-performance network, which is really focused on the needs of the research community. And then we have an experimental network that can be broken without impeding what goes on in our production network. And it's for our network scientists and the physicists and astronomers and so on who need that kind of network facility. One of the things that we do that is unique is that we partner with other major networks in California and around the United States to have traffic from our sole purpose network for education go to their network, so that when a search goes off to Google from our network or to Microsoft, or someone needs the computer storage at Amazon, it goes from our network to their network. And we peer with 88 of the largest networks in the United States. We also peer internationally. And we have a lot of capacity that we have distributed around the western United States, and we partner with our peer networks around the world. Just this last week, we announced the first 100 gigabit trans-Pacific connection between our network and Tokyo. We expect additional ones of those to come online, particularly the Australia, New Zealand, but another one from the Asia Pacific. And that enables the really high end of research, and it is the first research and education 100 gig capacity across the Pacific. There are 2 now in the Atlantic, largely supporting the research activities at CERN in Switzerland. So I'm going to go really quickly because I know we're sort of limited on time, but why do we do all this? And I'm just going to show you one example here. We have off the Pacific coast, there's what's called the Cabled Observatory, and it is a fiber optic cable and power that's on the Juan de Fuca tectonic plate, and about every 50 kilometers or so, that's instrumented, and that network connects to our network, as does the one that is off Vancouver. And it allows 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, access to the sea floor for every kind of science imaginable. And right here, I'll look at one that's of interest to us in California, which would be earthquakes and the tectonic plates. That data is accessible not only to high-end researchers at Stanford or Berkeley, but ultimately to a K-12 high school or a community college. And it is our goal to make sure that those schools, those community colleges, have the ability to use that real-time data in their science in particular. And this is one of numerous examples of this kind of big data science that's finding its way into schools and increasingly into informal science centers like the Exploratorium, who connect to us as well. This is just another example of the kinds of science that are enabled by this fiber optic cable on the tectonic plate that connects to our network. Many kinds of sciences, and it really is a charismatic kind of science, and draws in a lot of young people too, who may not be predisposed initially to study science. As far as our initiatives around digital divide in rural California, we have three significant ones going on simultaneously. Increasing the bandwidth capacity of community colleges and off-site community college centers, something that the legislature funded in the previous legislative session. We have the K-12 last mile projects. There was $26 million 2 sessions ago and $50 million in the previous session. Somebody alluded to that earlier. While we didn't require any particular bandwidth, we were able to get a gigabit service to almost all the schools that had previously maybe had a T1, and some of them fractional T1s. There are, of course, still areas in the state where we received no bids. And we are connecting by the end of the next fiscal year, we'll have roughly 2/3 of the library jurisdictions in California with broadband capacity. And we're similarly seeing from our telecommunications and cable partners speeds of 1 gig to a lot of libraries. We had the first 10 gigabit library system in the world in San Francisco. We're going to see 30 more in the coming year. On the high end, we've increased the capacity of our backbone network to 100 gigabits and dropped that capacity off at our research universities, and have a National Science Foundation funded project led by UC San Diego and UC Berkeley, with participation from all the UCs, Stanford, Caltech, and USC, the Department of Energy, NASA Ames, and some other national and global partners in developing new ways for scientists to use this capacity and ensuring sort of the end-to-end performance of the network. Like all the things that we do at Scenic, we see that this will eventually find its way to the community colleges, to K-12, and to libraries as we develop these capacities. And similarly, we're working with a number of the companies who are up here, as well as companies who build fiber, to endeavor to reach out to those communities that currently have inadequate or no service, to make sure that our constituents, that is all of education, formal and informal, receive that capacity, and presumably in so doing, those companies will extend that capacity to business and to home markets.